Hey, what is going on everyone? In this video, what I'd like to do is show you guys how you can create an app that's able to solve Sudoku puzzles for you. So this is what the app's going to look like when we're all done. Right now, all I'm doing is putting the numbers that we were given into the board. Now, once I click the solve button, you could see that this program was able to solve this puzzle really quickly. I think it was less than a second. If we give it a harder puzzle though, as you can see right now, this puzzle, it's going to take a little bit longer for it to solve. I believe it comes out to be around 10 seconds, which I actually don't think is too bad. I should also mention that after I click the solve button, I don't speed up anything. It is all real time. So if this seems like something you'd like to make, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you know when I upload the next video in this series. Alright, so to start off, all I want to do for this video is create our Sudoku board. Now, if we come over to the palette, you can see there is no Sudoku board option, so we're going to have to actually create our own custom view. The way we could do that is by coming over to the far left panel, coming down to Java, and expanding all of the folders within there. And we're going to have to create our own class. So if you right click on Sudoku Solver, or whatever you happen to name this project, you can click New Java Class, and then name it something. So I'm going to call it Sudoku Board. Hit enter, and then click OK. We're not going to fill in any of these slots here. So then you'll be presented with this file, and what we're going to want to do right off the bat is extend the view class. And this should automatically import the view class. If it doesn't, be sure to write this in at the top of your file. And now you can see that our class is underlined in red, and that's because we haven't defined a constructor for our class yet. So if we hover over it, you can click Create Constructor, and then we want this second one because we want to be able to define our own attributes for our view. So if you click OK, you'll see that Android Studio will fill in a bunch of code for you and import a bunch of things as well. Alright, so now that we have our class kind of created, the next thing that we're going to want to do is create an attributes resource file. The way we do that is by coming over to the far left panel again, and then expanding our resources folder, coming down to values, and expanding that folder as well. And within this values folder, we're going to want to create an attributes.xml file. To do that, all we have to do is right click on values, hover over new, and then click values resource file. And then we're going to name it attrs, so ATTRS, and then leave everything else as the default, then click OK. So then you should be presented with your attrs.xml file. Once you click OK, we're going to expand this tag a little bit, and then within our resources tag, what we're going to want to do is include the declare styleable tag, and then we're going to name it whatever you named your class in the beginning. So in my case, I named it Sudoku board. Android Studio already recognizes that, so I'm just going to press enter and it'll fill it in for me. Then we're going to close this tag. And within here, we're going to declare our first attribute for our Sudoku board. To start off, I just want to declare the Sudoku board color. So the way we do that is by using the attrs tag, so ATTR, and then we're going to give it a name of board color. And then we need to tell it what format we're using. And in our case, it's going to be a color. And then we just close off that tag. And right now we defined our first attribute for our custom view. Alright, so now we created the first attribute for our Sudoku board, and in our case, it's the Sudoku board's color. So now when we go off to our activity main.xml file, and we define our Sudoku board, we bring it out onto the XML, and we define a color for our Sudoku board. Let's say we give it a color of black or blue, red, whatever you want it to be. The next thing we need to do is grab that color that we define in our XML file and bring that over into a variable that we create in our Java file, so we can actually work with our Sudoku board color. If we come over to our sudokuboard.java file, then we're going to make our way down to the constructor, and in here we're just going to create a typed array that's going to store all the attributes we could ever add to our Sudoku board. So we're going to type in typed array, and Android Studio should import the typed array class for you, and then I'm just going to call this A to keep things simple, and then we're going to go context.getTheme.obtain styled attributes. And then within here, we need to pass our attrs.xml file for the first argument, and then it's r.styleable.sudokuboard. And then there's two final arguments that this method needs, and they're default values, so we're just going to set them equal to 0. Close this off, and I'm going to tab this over a little bit because it goes past that line. So now that we have our typed array and it's storing all of the attributes we defined for our Sudoku board, we need to extract them and place them within individual variables that we define in our Java code. So we can do that by using a try finally block. So if we go try, and then after this, we want to type in finally, And after we run everything in the try block, we're going to go a.recycle, which is going to free up some memory for our app. And then within the try block, what we need to do is extract the individual attributes and set them equal to variables. So the first variable that we need to create is our board color. So we could type in private, final, int, and then board color. All right, so then we're going to come down to our try block and actually extract the board color from our typed array and set that equal to our board color variable that we just defined. So to do that, we're going to type in board color, set that guy equal to a.getInteger, and then within this function, we're going to type in r.stylable.sudokuboard_board color. And this also requires us to define a default value, which we're just going to set as 0. Close that off. And all this line is doing is extracting the board color from our typed array and then setting that equal to our board color variable that we defined in our Java code. Okay, so now that we grabbed the attribute that we defined for our Sudoku board and stored that into our board color, what I'd like to do is determine the dimension of our Sudoku board based upon which device our user is using. So the way we do that is by overriding our onMeasure method. So if we come outside of our constructor, we could type in @override, come past the override statement and type in protected, void, and then onMeasure. And within here, onMeasure is going to take in 2 arguments. They're both going to be integer values, and we're going to type in int width and then int height. Close this off, and then we're going to type in super.onMeasure, and then we're just going to pass in our width and height to our onMeasure method. So then after the super call, past this, what I want to do is define a new variable. We're going to go int dimension, set that equal to math.min, and what I want to place in the min function is the width and height of the user's device. And the reason for that is because I want our Sudoku board to be a perfect square, and in order for it to fit on the screen, we need to determine whether or not the width or height is smaller and set that smaller value equal to our dimension so it can be a square and still fit on screen. So if we type in this.getWidth, and then we can type in this.getHeight, this is going to determine whether or not our width or height is smaller and set that equal to dimension, which will allow our Sudoku board to be a perfect square and still fit on the user's screen. So I hope that makes sense. If not, let me know down in the comments and I can explain it a little bit differently. Then after this, what we need to do one more thing. We need to set the measured dimension to dimension, dimension. And what this is doing is just defining the width and height of our view. And in our case, whether this is the width or height, so whichever one's smaller, that is going to be our dimension value, giving us a perfect square. Now that we have the dimension of our Sudoku board defined, I want to actually start drawing on our Sudoku board. To do that, we're going to need to override another method. So we're going to come down, type in @override, and then past this, we're going to type in protected, void, and the method that we're going to override is the onDraw method. So we're going to type in onDraw, and within here, we're going to need to pass in the canvas. So what is the canvas? And I think the best way to describe the canvas is the total area that our view occupies on the user's screen. So if we were to draw on the canvas or our view that we're creating, it's not going to bleed off into anything else. It's only defined for the area that the view occupies. So we're going to close off this method here. So next, we're going to need to create a variable that's an instance of the paint class. Now I think I can explain this a little bit better once we start writing a little bit more code, but it's essentially like a paint bucket and a paint brush in one. And that'll make a little bit more sense once we start writing code, but let's define this right now. We're going to type in private final paint, set that equal to, we'll call our variable board color paint, and then we're going to set that equal to a new paint. Then within our onDraw, we're going to go board color paint dot set style. So come down here, and then we're going to type in paint dot style dot stroke. So this is going to be like the paint brush. We're going to set a stroke, and then we're also going to define a width for it. So we're going to go board color paint dot set stroke width, And then we're going to give it a value of 16. And then here's where I would also call it a paint bucket. So if we type in board color paint dot set color, we could set the color to our board color. So these two lines of code would act as like the paint brush, and this line of code right here is almost like the paint bucket. So I kind of like thinking of it as like a combo. And then another line of code that we're going to need, and this is going to make sure that our lines look crisp and they're not going to be all funky. We're going to go board color paint dot set anti-alias, and we're just going to set that equal to true. So now we have everything set up to actually start drawing on our Sudoku board view. So what I'd like to do is just draw a rectangle around the perimeter of our view. The way we do that is by typing in canvas, which is the total area that our view occupies, dot draw rect to draw a rectangle on our view. And I like to draw it around the perimeter. So if we set our starting point to the top left corner, so 0, 0, and then I'd like to go to the bottom right corner. So if we type in get width and then get height, which will evidently be the same thing because of our onMeasure method. Then we just type in our board color paint, which is going to paint that on our view. So now I think we have enough code to see our Sudoku board when we place it in our XML file. So let's navigate over to activity-main.xml and let's actually throw our Sudoku board onto the design. The first thing we're going to need to do is change this line of code. So instead of having app here, we need to type in custom. And then this is going to allow us to use our custom view. And then to actually place the view that we created, our Sudoku board, out onto the design, we need to direct Android Studio to the path of our class. So if we come over to the far left panel, you can see I have these 3 folders, and then we have the Sudoku board class, which contains all the code that defines our view. In the opening tag, we're going to need to type in com, which is referencing the first folder in the path, dot practical coding, dot Sudoku Solver, and then we're going to need to actually type in whatever we named our class. So in my case, I typed in Sudoku board for that. So we're going to go Sudoku board. So just to further reiterate this, all this tag is just directing Android Studio to our Sudoku board class that contains all of the code necessary to construct our view. So the first folder in my path is com, followed by practical coding. Yours is going to probably be something different, followed by the third folder, which I called Sudoku Solver. This happens to be the name of the project. And then Sudoku board, which is the name of the class that holds all the code for our Sudoku board view. So now that we have our view out onto our design, we need to get rid of this error here by adding some constraints to our Sudoku board. So if we come over to the design, you can see our Sudoku board in the top left-hand corner. So if we grab this little bubble and drag him over to the right, drag him over to the left, down to the bottom, and to the top, you can see that we get this square here, which is the width of our Android Studio device. Now, if you don't get a square here, be sure to come up to the top toolbar and click on Build, come all the way down to Clean Project, and then once your project is clean, come down and rebuild it again, and then your Sudoku board should be all updated and good to go. So now that we have our constraints for the Sudoku board, let's actually define the color of it. So if we come down, we can type in custom, colon, and if you remember, the attribute we defined in our adders.xml file was board color. So we're going to go custom, colon, board color, and then we're going to define a color. I'm going to make it black, so we type in hashtag 123456 for black, and if we come over to the design, you can see that we have this black square out on our design now. So our Sudoku board is starting to come along, but before we leave and go over to the sudokuboard.java file, what I'd like to do is actually add in an ID for our Sudoku board just because we're here. So we're going to type in Android :ID and then set that equal to @ +ID / whatever you want the ID for our Sudoku board to be. Now, I'm just going to call it Sudoku board because that just makes sense to me. I'm going to copy and paste this, throw it in here, and now our Sudoku board has an ID. So once you added that, come over to the sudokuboard.java file, and what we're going to do now is actually add in the individual lines that make up a Sudoku board. And if you're not sure what that looks like, I can pull one up real quick. I'm talking about these lines right here. But before we do that, we need to actually define a cell size. And when I say cell size, I mean these individual boxes that make up the Sudoku board. So to do that, we're going to need to come back over to our onMeasure method, and in here we're going to set cell size, now we haven't defined this yet, equal to the dimension divided by 9, because there's 9 cells per row and column in a Sudoku board. So divide that by 9, and then we're going to come up to the top and define that. So we're going to go private int cell size and just leave it as that. And then now we have the dimension for our cell size, and then we can come down and create a new custom method that's going to draw in the individual lines that'll make up our Sudoku board. So to add in these lines, what I want to do is create our own custom methods. So if we come outside of the onDraw method, I want to create this first one. So we're going to go private void, and I want to call it draw board. Now you can name it whatever you want. This is just what I want to call it. And then our draw board is going to take in the canvas or the area that our view occupies. So we're going to type in canvas, and then we're just going to call it canvas, the same as our onDraw method, and then close this off. And then within our draw board, what I want to do is have 2 for loops. One that'll take care of drawing the rows and one that'll take care of drawing the columns. And if you remember when I showed you the Sudoku board previously, there were thin and thick lines. So I also want to create 2 methods, one that'll draw a thick line and one that'll draw a thin line to kind of save some code. So if we come above our onDraw method, I'm going to type in private void draw thick line, close that off. He's not going to take in anything. And then I also want to do a thin line. So we're just going to copy and paste this, change it from thick to thin. Now let's add the code for the thin and thick line methods. And if we come up to the onDraw, we can actually copy and paste these 3 lines here and paste them into our methods down here. And the only thing we're going to need to change is the stroke width. I'm going to make our thick lines a width of 10 and our thin lines a width of 4. Now let's come down to our draw board method and actually create the 2 for loops that's going to take care of drawing our rows and columns. So if we come in here, I'm going to type in for int c for column, and we're going to set that equal to 0. And then we're going to go while c is less than 10, because we want to draw 9 lines. And then we're going to go c++, and then finish that off. And I'm going to copy this for loop and change the c variable to an r for row. So r, and r. So then within here, what I want to do is create an if statement that determines whether or not we need to draw a thin or a thick line. And if you remember from looking at the Sudoku board, a thick line is drawn every 3. So if we type in if c mod 3 equals 0, then we want to draw a thick line. Otherwise, we want to draw a thin line. And then we're going to copy and paste this because it's going to be the exact same for our rows, except instead of saying c mod 3, we need to change it to r mod 3. Then outside of our if statement, we're going to type in canvas.drawLine. And then within the draw line, we're going to need to pass in a starting point and an end point for our line. So we want to start off at whatever the cell size is, times that by c, comma 0. And then the end point is going to be cell size times c, comma get width. And then we're also going to need to pass in the board color paint. So I'm just going to bring this point down here to make things a little bit cleaner. And what this is doing, it's almost exactly like what we did in our onDraw, is it sets up our paint bucket and paintbrush, and then it will draw onto our view. So in this case, we set up our paint bucket paintbrush with a stroke width of 16, a color of whatever our board color was set to in the XML, and then we drew a rectangle. Now we're doing the same exact thing in the draw board function that we just created, except we do it a little bit differently. So if we need to draw a thick line, we're going to set up the thick line, which is all this code here, and then we're going to come down and actually draw a line. And then if we need to draw a thin line, it's going to set up all the stuff needed to draw a thin line and then draw that line as well. So what I want to do now is just copy and paste this, place it after this if statement, and then modify it so that it's able to draw a row rather than a column. So we just need to flop this. So Control C, we'll pass in 0 here, paste him in here, change the C to an R, and then this one needs to be get width, and then we need to pass in cell size times R, and this will draw in all of our rows. All right, so that's everything we need to draw our rows and columns. All we need to do now is reference this draw board method in our onDraw method. So after we draw a rectangle, we're going to type in draw board, and don't forget we need to pass in the canvas, our view that we need to draw on. And then if we come over to our activity main.xml, Click on the Sudoku board and you'll see that we have nothing drawn there. That's because we need to actually come up to build and then make project. Now, if this doesn't work for you, like it didn't work for me, we need to go back over to our Sudoku board.java file and we need to actually change get width and get height to get measured width and get measured height. So the difference between, let's say, get width and get measured width is that get width will give us the width of the view when it's displayed on screen, and the get measured width is going to display what the view actually wants to be in terms of its width. It's not going to be dependent upon the parent's size. So we're going to change get width to get measured width, or not get measured height, we want get measured width, and then we want to change get height to get measured height. And then if we come back over to our activity main.xml, if we go up to the toolbar, click build, make project, you'll see that we have our Sudoku board displayed in our design now. So I think this is a good spot to end the video. And the next one, what I'd like to do is add click events to our Sudoku board. So when we click a cell, its corresponding row and column get highlighted along with that cell. As always, if you guys have any questions or if you're having trouble getting something to work, just leave a comment down below and I'll see what I can do to help you guys solve that problem. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.